Here we are in coach certification training, and it's been quite a day. Had coaching all day. Just finished a training with some of you. Actually, we're on there live with Chris with how to make money coaching. But today we are now moving into week 3, and this is officially the day 1 live stream, and of week 3, I guess. And so, and as always, if you've never seen one of these before, we're going deeper. We're getting more detailed. We're going into some of the finer points, the multiple facets of the prism of the world of coaching and learning these advanced disciplines and an advanced certification, for that matter. A big part of what we're doing here in certification is integrating different disciplines together so we can make you the whole coach that that each of these, like if we have, I don't know, like an object like my phone, for instance, I've got different sides to it, right? It's one phone, but it has many facets to it. And so this one facet might be accountability, and this next facet is like we're going into this week assessment, and then the ends are strategy. I mean, obviously it's not the perfect metaphor here, but it all comes together to a cohesive whole to produce a result. And so this is really a part of what we're doing here in certification is taking these disparate disciplines, these areas or these spaces that we can master, and saying, hey, this is not the only thing. This is not the best thing. This is not the kumbaya perfect type of coaching or approach to coaching or skill set of coaching. This is one facet of what you're going to want to deliver to your clients at times. And then here's another facet, and you're practicing these in proximity. And when things get into proximity, they start to meld, they start to mesh together. And so, Master Coach University students, mastery program students, if you've been learning these disciplines over a period of years, certification is not about you like figuring that discipline out now because you already know that discipline. Certification is about you combining these and integrating them together. So that's a big part of what we're up to here, which is not what we're covering today. But in a way, I think what you're going to learn in this live stream is going to help with that integration in a couple different ways, conceptually at least. And this is kind of a fun area to talk about. So we're talking about the crutches of coaching. So what I mean by the crutches of coaching is like think of them as support pieces, things that are helping you to kind of get from here to there when you don't have it all perfect yet. I know for me, more than a decade and a half into my coaching career, we started working with the International Coach Federation. And so as such, I thought, I already know all this stuff. I'm a great coach already. But now that we're codifying our approaches through ICF, it's probably a good idea for me to like really get to know these competencies really well. So I took my top coach and we started coaching each other utilizing these 11 different competencies that ICF has codified over a period of decades as well. And, my initial thought was, I know this stuff. I do this stuff for a living. Like I'm kind of got it on all these basics. I don't need to really work on them. But I also understood, hey, the justification here is that I'm going to not just master these areas to a greater extent, but also understand what is the way of looking at this competency such that I can teach it and I don't just know it and kind of unconsciously have the ability to organize it myself. So I worked on these competencies for a period of like a long period of time with Colette Seaman, our top strategy coach, and you can think of these competencies as concepts like direct communication or powerful questions or the coaching agreement. These are conceptual areas, spaces, and we're going to talk about those today in a way. Not the competencies, but the idea of a space or a domain of skills and that you fill with your understanding of that, with your mastery of that area. So we were working on these competencies, what I would call concepts, and doing that really showed me that going back to basics helps build muscle because it's a very specific area that you work on. It's like you don't go to the gym and do pull-ups and say, well, now I've done that. I know how to do a pull-up. Never have to do that again, right? No, you're going to do that for the rest of your life if you want those muscles to continue to maintain themselves. Have you ever noticed a bodybuilder, like people complain, not complain, but they gossip about this, like with Arnold Schwarzenegger. You look at Arnold in his prime when he was really full-time bodybuilder and not like a movie star or a governor. Like he was a specimen, right? A physical specimen. And I mean, look, I'm not saying he doesn't work out anymore. I'm sure he does to some extent. But over the years, those muscles have gotten smaller and smaller, and they're not as impressive as they once were, right? And I think that's a great example. We see that with athletes sometimes. It's like they say the muscle turns to fat. It doesn't really do that. It's just the muscles get smaller and people can get fat, right? So but the point of that is that it's a use it or lose it world that we are in here. We're in an ever-changing, ever-growing world. And so what works for your body is you're never finished with your body. Your body is a process of reproduction and cells that are there to support things. And how you use it will render how your body produces a physicality, energy, shape, posture, right? All these different elements. And it's the same thing with your body of work as a coach. How you utilize basics will codify the response that your brain comes across with in terms of delivering on those spaces. Even basic spaces that we might say is not that amazing, that like ICF might talk about. So it showed me that going back to basics really builds muscle, because I was doing these competencies and I was finding that some of them were no big deal. But as I attempted to demonstrate other aspects of them, I realized that I don't have conscious mastery over this. Like I unconsciously maybe do this, roll the dice, but it doesn't happen in every session. And so I started to realize these principles and the way organizing myself consciously according to these competencies actually has me coach completely differently, at a whole different level than if I was just naturally operating with my kind of default style with somebody I'm coaching at the time. So, and I was really surprised. I was surprised that I can actually improve, beyond just attempting to, or I could actually improve from literally just attempting to work on a competency, to attempt to deliver a concept by rote. So, and it made me think of that as a crutch. Because frankly, again, my ego was like, I don't need this competency. I don't need to concentrate on that. I don't need to use that as my crutch. I don't need those crutches. I'm a master without those crutches. And then suddenly I used the crutch and I found that I was able to get from A to B in a different way, at sometimes more productive ways, more efficient ways, ways that manifested extraordinary results for my client. And so it made me realize not only am I building new muscle or more muscle of the same type, but I'm also actually supported by this crutch in ways that I didn't imagine because I didn't think I needed it. And it dawned on me, it's like, maybe I'm not as able-bodied as a coach as I think I am. Maybe I have a sprained ankle and I don't even know it. Maybe my leg is broken and it's slowing me down. It's making it so I don't get from A to B without this crutch for a while. And so it really shifted how I thought about what I'm calling these crutches, right? Now ICF will call competencies. So these crutches, there's different types of crutches. I mean, I'm not going to zoom in on this really, but like somebody could have like a walker, which is like a major crutch. It's almost like a wheelchair. It's like, it's almost walking for you. It takes care of almost everything. But then, after a while, you might, assuming that you don't need the walker anymore, you might gravitate to like just a pair of crutches, right? A pair of regular crutches. You can kind of get around. You're able-bodied enough to not need the walker anymore, but you still need something. And then you get to the point where maybe maybe you need a cane, or maybe you're going up a mountain and a cane would help, like a walking stick. Like, would we complain about using a walking stick that we're too good for the walking stick versus a walker, like kind of does similar things, but suddenly that crutch is helping somebody go up a mountain and do some extraordinary things with their body. And it might be helpful or safer or faster to use that particular crutch. You don't find the mountain climber is so egotistical that they can't use a piece of equipment. There's a lot of dead mountain climbers that thought that, right? And I don't think that's exactly that's not exactly a role model for me. I don't know if it is for you. Somebody who would die for their ego. And then eventually, like, this is not really a crutch, but, helps this person, the jetpack, and all of a sudden they're flying with it. You don't want to fly without that, without the wings. So there's all sorts of different contraptions, mechanics, and concepts and ideas that we can employ to help us when we're not able to get from A to B yet, because we just don't have the skills. But it also helps us to get from A to B more efficiently, faster, etc., depending on our skill set and how we want to manifest that coaching conversation. Does that make sense? So simplifying it, I would say the crutches of coaching are important training wheels before you're ready for coaching. So you can coach, like somebody will say, well, I'm not ready to coach, so I can't coach. Yes, you can. You can coach before you're ready. You just need some crutches. You employ some of these crutches that we literally are working with in certification. You don't need to be ready. You can still coach. You can still be effective. You can still add value to your client. So a crutch is really good towards, as these guys would say, healing something or building towards being sufficient enough to do it without the crutch. But in coaching, same thing. A crutch is good for building towards self-sufficiency. Now, if you use a crutch beyond the need for it to make you self-sufficient, right, so you can heal up or so you can build muscle to the point where you can walk on your own two legs, then it might hinder you. Like if I'm walking from here to there and I'm using a walker and I don't need it, like that's probably going to slow me down. I'm probably going to be carrying my walker around. That's a problem then, right? So we don't want to use a crutch beyond its usefulness, but we want to use it when it's needed and not lie to ourselves that we don't need anything and we're just doing our own thing and it's no big deal. Because usually the coaches I see that are like that their ego has pushed them to the point of thinking they don't need to improve as coaches, they're usually not valuable enough as coaches to have any kind of successful coaching business, to really add value to people. I see it all the time. Not every day, but on a regular basis. So let me show you some of the crutches that we use in certification. And I know you're going to be maybe somewhat familiar with some of this. Some of it might be a new way of looking at what we're doing together. And hopefully it'll motivate you and inspire you to use what we're up to in certification even more and with even more intensity and responsibility for it. So these are 3 different domains of crutches, if you will. And we start with kind of more of the walker, where it's a bigger foundation, it gives you more support, all the way up to the jetpack, if you will. And I would suggest you always use the jetpack, because that's something that we can all leverage. And so we'll start with the basic crutches that you may, if you're brand new to coaching, you probably need those right now. And understand that you won't always use those consciously or need to leverage the crutch of that. It'll always be there for you, but there's a point where you've built this foundation so strongly that you're at the next level, and you're working on that. You need crutches to kind of boost you up. Does that make sense? I know where there's a little conceptual here, but I really want you to get this, and so that's why I drew this model for you. So think of this like there's a hierarchy of crutches. There's a hierarchy of support systems that you can employ as a coach. And there's actually another video I did in the past that is similar to this, talking about hierarchies of coaching systems, that I'd suggest you watch. I will try and put it in the chat after we're done with the video, but it's also in your description right now. Don't go to it now, but it's available to you. And I also tag it, I think we're like 17 minutes in, so I'll tag it at this point later. But it's a video that it's titled "What are coaching tips?" because there's these tips that people talk about in coaching. Like, here's a tip for coaching. Here's a tip on how to coach people. And so I actually talk about in that video, I'll go a little bit more advanced than just answering that question to what are the different levels of support tips that you might utilize? What goes beyond a tip? Because a tip's kind of the simplest level, like do this. And you're like this dog learning to jump through some hoops, learning some tricks that somebody just gave them. Okay. So that's a different way of looking at these kind of hierarchical crutches or frameworks or tools that you might use as a coach and employ. And we want to go up this pyramid, so to speak. So anyway, check that video out at your leisure. But let's start with this first one. Language and syntax. This is the first crutch that you should be using and focusing on. And I give you this in spades and certification, if you haven't noticed. Language and syntax. So let's start with language. You want to get the language of coaching. Coaching language is somewhat different than just your average everyday language. And you change the language, you change what things mean. You change the language, you change what's possible, because possibility for people in their life, like there's possibilities out there in the world, right? All sorts of things physically that could happen, right? Quantum possibilities, right? We live in the matrix of possibility. But we don't really think from a possibility perspective because most people, their language is based in fixing, changing, critiquing. You know, you watch the news, that's the language of change and fix, right? This person has broken these rules, or this person committed a crime and now they're going to jail, or, you know, nowadays politics is like half the news or more than half the news. Like this person lied and they have to make up for that, right? This is all about critique and fix. What's wrong with this group? Why are they acting so bad? Why are these people criminals? You know, it's like, it's all about what's wrong. What do we do to fix it? How do we, you know, it's all about like reacting to the current atmosphere, fixing it, like this, like a doctor with a hypodermic needle, or, you know, a mechanic with a hammer and a wrench. You know, it's like, what can I do to like fix stuff? And by the way, nothing wrong with that, but it has its limitations lie in the fact that there's no possibility in that. All fixing, all changing is based in the past, because the past is what has produced the current situation, right? And so we were just living in the past, trying to fix what the past has created for us, and we're wondering why, like, things aren't really amazing for us. Well, it's because we are projecting, like we're basically we're slaves to past. We're slaves to our karma. I'm not saying don't deal with your karma. I'm just saying don't be a slave to it. Don't be limited by it. So fixing and changing has its place, and that is not the language of coaching. The language of coaching is the language of possibility. And so you listen to the news, and they have all that languaging that's all about change and critique and what's good, better, best, and all that comparison, all that stuff. Again, nothing wrong with it, but it's a limited language, right? We create possibilities through the language of coaching. Create extraordinary possibility for your life or your business and have breakthrough quantum results. That's like, well, yeah, I mean, it's English or whatever your language is, but it's not the English that they're talking about on the news. It's not the language that we go to the bar, we go to the restaurant, we talk to our like mother-in-law or our buddies from the bar. That's not the language they're using, right? So there's a different language that you want to get of coaching that creates possibilities in the wake of that language. And so one way to describe this would be definitions, like understanding what is rather than trying to change it, appreciating it for what it is. That's an awareness form of language. Like, what is so about this? What is at the source of this? You know, those kind of languagings are ones that we don't usually use from day to day outside of the coaching world. Now, there are scripts around that can give you questions and conversations that you could actually employ just by reading the script. It can produce a different result because the scripting, the literal language, is a language of possibility. Even if you're not possibility based at that point and you're kind of a limited person, you could still use the language in a way that's unlimited, that is pure possibility for your client. They can really get some results from that, even if you're not an amazing guru yet. That's an amazing crutch that you want to leverage. So as we work together, you're learning the language through scripting and through models and through our theoretical elements that we teach you. You're also learning it through seeing me do the coaching and actually hearing the words I would use, the questions I use, and the distinctions that I offer through language, the definitions that I offer. Some of that stuff is not like I'm reading the script, but I know the script. And it comes through me and kind of unconsciously at this point, right? But you could do it consciously just as easily as I can do it unconsciously. And eventually you don't have to do it consciously because it'll come through you naturally. That's the ideal, okay? And you won't get there tomorrow, right? You got to really be conscious and do it word for word for a while. So utilize the language. Definitions and scripts are a part of that. Language creates distinctions, right? If I say, I love you, that's one distinction. But if I say, I'm in love with you, and in English we know there's a distinction between just loving someone and being in love with them. Thinking about this the other day. It's like, if I love you, that's more of a concept. It's like, well, I care for you. Like, I care what happens to you. I'm putting your needs above my own at times. Like, you could love somebody and feel nothing for them, right? Just have it be more of an existential love. Like, I'm going to do good things for you, right? And who you are matters to me, right? That's not purely emotion. But, I'm in love. It's like now I'm inside this thing of love. I'm actually impacted by my love for you emotionally. Like, I feel it. I have the warm and fuzzies, it's like I want to be around you. I'm attracted to you. Those kind of things start showing up. That's probably more romantic as well, obviously. But that simple languaging change, those that know that term of art, that distinction can then separate. It's not just like love, 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 love. There's all these different kinds of love. Another great example of this is, obviously I don't know the language on this one, but like if you're an Eskimo, like 54 different words that mean ice, because or snow or whatever, right? It's like there's so much snow around, and there's so many different types of snow that they're distinguished from one another in language for the Eskimo. This is snow that is dirty. This is snow I can eat. This is snow that I'm going to fall inside of and die. This is packed snow that I can walk on. This is snow that's more ice and it's very slippery. I don't know, right? That has an impact on them. Those distinctions or definitions are created in language, and without the language, you don't get the distinction. You don't get the distinction that's life or death for the Eskimo. So they create the language to support them. So if I want you to be able to see a map of your life or your business or your finances or your emotions or your relationship, whatever we're working on, right? I want you to see and distinguish between aspects of that you've never distinguished before. I'll give you one example from a session today. I was talking to one of my clients, and she was giving me an update for like 35 minutes before we really could start the session. And we were even talking about her commitments, and she never answered the question as to whether or not she followed through on the commitments or not. And then she asked me, hey, Jeff, I really need to improve my time management. I was like, oh my God, you don't say, right? And so I told her, you talk in stories. And I said, I think that a big part of that is that you're not here right now. You're not really aware or present, because you get sucked into your story and you're living in the story. You're living in the past or the future that story creates, rather than the present moment where we're just here together and there is no story. There's just reality, because reality only occurs in one time frame, the present. A lot of people that have trouble with time management, I'm included in that for sure, big time live in the future and the past, and they get caught up not being in the moment, and they wonder why they're not very productive in the moment, right? Now, there's actually another client I talked to today. She was like, I don't even know what we want to work on today. My life is so amazing. She's been working with me for like 3 years now. She's gone through all these amazing relationship changes, really hard stuff, and her life is just epic. I mean, it's like a utopia at this point. And she probably never believed she could actually arrive at. Just like full of love in her life, has amazing success, has like just fantastic family situation. It's like I almost can't believe it because when I see what she's done, she's been very courageous in taking the coaching and implementing what I've offered her. So anyway, she's like, I don't even know what I want today. Like, I don't have a result for our session. And I told her, if we were to look far enough into the future, you're going to find a result that would be worth talking about. But you're such an achiever, because she is. I mean, she's a super achiever, right? She's always been that. I said, you're such an achiever. Achievers live in the moment, and they're really strong in the moment to be super productive. It's one of the reasons why many achievers, not all, but many, have trouble thinking too far into the future, because their strength, their muscle that they've built is all about being in the now. And if they lived in the future, they wouldn't care about producing anything right now, and you wouldn't manage your time well. And she's an ultimately amazing manager of her time. But you think more than 3 months in the future, and she can't even imagine it, right? So like I'm working with her on actually working into what's the next story for her, right? What's the new goal that she can't even fathom right now, that if she was aware of it and we discussed it in language, we could create a distinction called the next level for her, and then she can live in the now, moving in that direction, right? So there's all these different distinctions that occur in language that if we do not language them, if we don't communicate them powerfully, if there's no words for them, no language, no definitions, no scripting around it, it doesn't exist. We can't create it. And like I was trying to tell you when I got in these stories, speaking of stories, is that your client, if their map is so blurry that they can't see and distinguish the different kinds of snow in their life, the different kinds of relationships in their life, the different kinds of money in their life, the different kinds of opportunities or emotions in their life, they don't see it, they don't distinguish those things, then they have no power to transform it. They could change an emotion, they could change a relationship, they could change the money thing, but they'll never transform. They'll just go back and forth, and they'll be in a dilemma. It'll be the prison of their current life because they didn't create definitive distinctions that can occur in language if you language them, and they'll have no ability to manipulate them because they don't have access to that language because they can't say it, they can't see it. It reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever seen this movie, The Risky Business. It was like I think it's literally like the first Tom Cruise movie ever made. Okay, famous movie, very well known for those of us that are old enough to have seen it. And I remember the beginning of that movie, this Tom Cruise's, like a degenerate friend is trying to convince Tom Cruise that he should like hire a bunch of sex workers and bring him into the house and like bring all his friends over and have just this giant orgy, right? And so Tom is like kind of a repressed young man, and his parents are very straight-laced, and he's like, I don't want to get in trouble or anything, and his friends like, hey, you know what? Sometimes you just got to say, and like I won't say it here for YouTube purposes, but the WTF words, right? He says, what the, what, right? And he's like, he obviously didn't call him Tom. I think his name is Joel or something. He said, Joel, sometimes you just got to say, what the, make your move, go for it. And he's like, what are you talking about? And he said, if you can't say it, you can't do it. And that's exactly what I'm talking about with this language of coaching thing. You got to get this language in you. You got to master the language consciously at first and eventually unconsciously, because your client, although that's probably not the thing your client has a goal around, but it's kind of an odd example, I'm sure. But the point is, they have their goals, they have their interests, and the reason their goals not accomplished already is because they haven't done the things they need to do at the level of quality they need to do them in order to achieve that goal, assuming it's possible. So that's not even possible for them because of that. And the reason they haven't done it is they can't say it with a level of mastery that distinguishes the map where they can navigate properly. I'm not saying they're not doing anything. Maybe they really care about their future and they're really motivated, but they're probably doing things in a way that doesn't distinguish reality with enough of a fine a fine measurable way of distinguishing between like being, loving and being in love, or the different types of snow, or the different business models, the different relationships. You get the idea, such that they can define their world with more finesse, and they can navigate then with more power because they can talk about it, manipulate their understanding of it through language, because we have ultimate freedom with manipulating our own language, and then they can act upon that concept, that language, those distinctions they've laid out. And you can begin that process by mastering your own coaching language. Does that make sense? I mean, this is very basic, but I hope that the basic understanding of it doesn't delude you to think that you already have access to this and you're already giving your clients access to it, because your chances are not. And as a result, you aren't accessing this basic level. And I'm here to say, use the crutches that I offer you. And if you don't like using the words that I give you, maybe it's because you haven't discovered that distinction at the level, and you have a lack of power with that language. A lot of times when we work on accountability, people are like, I wouldn't say that. Well, yeah, that's why you're not producing the result with your client, because you are being a way that is not appreciating the distinction that language brings. Now, you can use your own style and alter the language, but chances are, if you don't get the distinctions, which are based in language, you won't have enough mastery of that language to change the script. You're not in a position to change that script yet, chances are, until you really get and can live with the language of it, because you've distinguished what that language really is and you own it, not just say it like a parrot. And that said, I mean, saying like a parrot's a great start. It's better than nothing. So distinctions live in language, and language is the basis for coaching, because coaching happens in language. And we can start with a language crutch like definitions and scripts, or distinctions for that matter, so that we can very simply start to lay out a foundation for the coaching conversations that you have. Verbiage. What words should you use? What's empowering verbiage versus disempowering verbiage? Well, I can't do that because it's your fault, right? Versus, hey, I'm stopped in doing that right now, and what's at the source of that is me being this way. How often do you hear that in the news? Like, you ever see the news say, you know what, Donald Trump is stopped from producing this transformation in our society that's needed because, and what's at the source of that is his sense of fear about admitting when he doesn't understand something, right? Or some odd other thing about that, right? Like, you will never hear that on the news, because they don't live in the language of possibility and creating distinctions and transformation. They live in the language of critique and change and fix and decide on what's good and what's bad and creating a pecking order. I mean, it's all this very past-based, limitation-based language. That's what they're well-versed in. Look, we're well-versed in it as well, because that's the language we inherited. We want to invent a new language, and as coaches, create possibility through that language and have empowering conversations rather than disempowering conversations that are much more common in our society, especially on the news. So, okay, so I think we covered that. Oh, questions are a part of this. Statements, scripted questions, scripted statements. Use those crutches. Leverage them. You should relish those. In accountability, we use scripts like crazy, but in other areas, domains of coaching as well. So now, beyond that, also part of language is syntax, right? So syntax is like the order that you put things in, right? So if I say the dog bit Johnny versus Johnny bit the dog, that's a very different meaning. And so if you want to change, if you want to master transforming meaning with your client, or having them appreciate meanings that they don't yet see, distinguishing new meanings, syntax is darn important. So saying things in a certain order, the process, the hierarchy of what's first, second, and third, that's syntactical, all right? A lot of NLP, if any NLP coaches out there, you learn NLP, you learn a lot of processes that are syntactic in nature. Ask this question, insert it here, have them visualize this. You're basically like learning to jump through some basic hoops, and that can like completely transform, well, not completely, but it can radically change what stops somebody and make massive shifts in terms of what somebody feels, thinks, does, how they operate, how productive they are. I mean, that stuff comes out of the basic NLP. And this is like the lowest level of coaching that you can do, right? So I don't think it's the end all be all by any means, but you learn that stuff, jump through those hoops, you could be quite powerful and empower your clients and add value to them at the base level. And you should do this consciously and use these crutches. Don't think that you're above them. That kind of ego is going to wipe out the possibility of what you could really provide for a client. So there's a big difference between having ego make you think, I'm so great, I don't have to worry about any of this stuff, even though I have no proof for that, I'm just confident, versus, hey, I've tested myself over and over again with lots of different types of clients, and I've delivered again and again and again, no matter what, because I've got the language and the syntax and I've used this. Now I can free myself up because I know who I am, and I know I can always fall back on that crutch as well. That'll give you a different level of confidence for most of us. And by the way, if you're already naturally confident, that's great, but confidence is not always a good thing. If you're confident and you operate in a way that's ignorant of what's needed or that's limited in nature, and that comes off to your client, whether they tell you that or not, your confidence is now limiting you. It's not empowering you. It might have empowered you to get on the phone with them or act like you know what you're doing and attract them to initially hire you. But now it's a drawback. So watch the slippery slope, the double-edged sword of confidence that would keep you off of the crutches. Like, again, like somebody broke their leg, right? Or they've got some issue with their legs that have them not yet, able to just walk on their own. Oh, great, I'm confident. I believe, I have positive thinking. I just believe in myself. I'm just going to do it anywhere. Let me walk. And then they fall right over. You can get really hurt through confidence, right? So let's use it when it's appropriate and when it's going to actually support us and our clients and our life, not when it's going to detract from us. Make sense? So any kind of experiential processes that you put people through a scripted process or a language process or a set of steps that are uber simple, that's like this base level. Language and syntax, and using crutches like definitions, scripts, processes, step-by-step formulas, things like that. It's a great place to start. Nothing wrong with doing it. I still use this stuff till today, maybe in a more creative way. But hey, if I know it's going to be the most valuable for my client in that conversation, I'm doing it. Like, I'm not going to hold back. Like, I'm going to be inspired to use these crutches, or to at least use language and syntax in a way that I know will support them. I'm happy to use some NLP technique or some questioning technique or some step-by-step, doing it by rote. Some of the best results I'll get with clients sometimes is just doing it in the basic level, right? Basics are actually quite advanced a lot of times. So, in fact, let me explain an example of that just for a second. Tony Robbins, one of my original mentors, he was studying Taekwondo with like the founder of Taekwondo, like this Jun Lee guy, right? And so this master of Taekwondo is teaching Tony the move, whatever the move was. I don't know what it was. And Tony was like, great, boom. And he's like, yeah, you got it. Okay, do it again. Boom. And then Tony was like getting anxious and he was like, okay, I got this. Okay, what's the next move? Like, what do I do after this in the form? And the master said, okay, I'm going to show you. Here's the next move. Boom. And he does the same exact move. And Tony's like, yeah, I got that. I got that move. Like, what's the next thing? What's the next move? Tony's goal, I think, was to like become a black belt in Taekwondo in like 6 months, because he was doing it for, I think, partially like promotional reasons. Like, he can brag about all these things that he's accomplished, which makes him the guru. Wouldn't put it past Tony to do that, but whatever. I'm ignorant of that. But anyway, so he's like, what's the next move? And he said, I told you, this is the next move. And he's like, no, I already got that move. What's the next move? And the master said to him, that is the next move. What's really sad is that you don't actually see that that's the next move. you don't actually see that this move, doing it over and over and over again, will have you find something to master about that move that you didn't before. You know, the old like Karate Kid, stand the floor, wax the car, wax on, wax off kind of thing, over and over and over and over and over again. And he said, until you get that, you're not going to master anything. You're not going to master this form because you're going to perform it in a lackadaisical way that doesn't see that doesn't distinguish what makes a masterful move like this versus just somebody mimicking the moves and acting like they can do something. Make sense? So just reminds me of this, getting the basics. Basics are advanced, actually, in a way. Okay, so next level, you handle language and syntax and definition, scripts, and processes, is more logic and dimensions. So logic and dimensions. So this is another level up. So let's start with logic. So logic is a crutch that we can use. So for instance, like this is like a logic, like having a flow chart or like a logic gate like you might use in a transistor, like do I go this way or that way? And basing that distinction on the data that it's fed, right? We in Master Coach University, we leverage flow charts to give you the logic of each advanced discipline. So inside of that flow chart, you can say, here I am, and I'm moving to this node, and I'm going to make this decision, and I'm going to have this conversation. Let's move on. So inside of that logic, inside of that flow chart, there's lots of language, lots of syntax, and we encapsulate that syntax and that language into the nodes of the logic process. So think of it like an expert system. Like I do this first, I do that second, but like it's not just basic syntax. It's if this, then that. Right? I'm taking different roads in the woods depending on what data I'm getting, what happens, etc. So I can actually make smarter decisions based upon the feedback I'm getting from my clients. So that's logic. They're decisions and finessing, more responsive processes. Because we already talked about, here's a process, but I could do this process and like some NLP trick with like 10,000 people. It's the same process. But in a flow chart, in the logic of a flow chart, in the logic of a expert system, I have more ability to work one-on-one with somebody and tailor that process to them based upon what they're telling me and what they're doing, what they experience. Does that make sense? And that's what we're doing with these domains or these disciplines of coaching. The most basic aspect of that, other than the language, is the logic of it and what you need to do, kind of paint by numbers in a way that responds to your clients. So decisions and finesse from more responsive processes, like making a better decision on where you want to go with the client based on who they are and what they're doing, what they're up to, and what feedback you get from them. And then finessing that process in a way that no trainer would ever do just because they have to work with more than one person. So a lot of the accountability processes are based in this. Some of the strategy coach processes are based in this. Dimensions, think of dimensions like a framework or a structure. That's kind of basic, but you need to fill in different aspects of it. It gives you different dimensions to look at and work with. Structures that can be filled with information, populated with data so that you can make new decisions when you look at all the data combined. I do this a lot with clients, by the way, is where we'll get a spreadsheet out in front of us and we'll say, okay, what are all the limiting beliefs you have? And then what's the impact of all that? Or what are all the incompletions and withholds that you have with people that you're relating to in your family? And they'll make a giant list of them. And in the spreadsheet, they'll cover what's the impact of that and what do we need to say about this and who's responsible for this and like all these different elements. And we can look at that in an array and appreciate where they stand in a much more advanced way than just like talking about one of those areas. We can combine more complex information together and create a context for where they're at and where they need to be as well. So that's logic and dimensions. Now let's move up to the final crutch. And this is I would say this is much more of a jetpack than a crutch, which is, and really even these are like, yes, they're crutches, but I mean, it's pretty advanced stuff for most coaches. But there's a point where these elements and just continuing to go over language, syntax, dimensions and logic and all this stuff is limiting to you. It will limit you in your coaching. It'll limit the coaching conversation. It'll limit your client because if you just sit on these crutches over and over again, you can't really fly. You can't go into a more of a magical process where where it's not just some language pattern, right? It's not just some, some logic loop that you created with your clients, right? It's something that goes above and beyond that in more of an interdependent or an inner magical relationship, as some of my predecessors have said, where the conversation itself creates magic because you're versed in language and you're versed in logic and dimensions, but you're also versed in concepts that support a conversation that goes way beyond this stuff. This stuff would actually be limiting in a way. So models and frameworks come out of concepts. More complex dimensions than just basic spreadsheets and things that must be graphed or pictured. They could be filled with data and information, but usually must be worked with by more sophisticated methods than just fill in the cracks, fill in the blanks. They support you in appreciating things way above and beyond the kind of the guttural language or the basic logic of things. It helps you abstract from language, abstract from logic, something that you can be grounded in that then doesn't limit you in the dogma of logic or the dogma of language. When we look at a lot of like codified religions and concepts that are written into law, let's say, they become so dogmatic a lot of times that like we know that the spirit that brought that theory to life, like you look at the messiahs of the past and the dogma that was created after them, that dogma was trying to like codify who they are and how they be and who they're becoming and the spirit that was within them, right? That's really what we're trying to document in language and logic, is really the concept of the spirit of it. Same thing like in law. Like we look at the Constitution or we look at written law, like in America, for instance, or in the US, there is a spirit of freedom and a spirit of agency and a spirit of equality, all these different concepts that are then put into language and have logic inside the law, but these don't do justice to the concept, do they? They never really do. And we could read this stuff and hope that we can come up with a concept based upon that. And that's why a lot of people, I think, always go back to the founding fathers and say, who were they and what did they feel? They're really looking at the entire story of it because they don't want to just get stuck in the language and dogma of the law. They want to appreciate why that law was needed or is needed and what it's really there to support, the spirit of that law versus the letter of that law. So language and logic doesn't do justice to concepts, but if you're not versed in this, you'll never be able to fly with the eagles in a concept because you won't have the horsepower to do it. Make sense? So the purpose of this concept piece is so that you don't get stuck or don't get limited by dogma, the dogma of language or the dogma of syntax or logic, the dogma of these kind of limited frameworks, that you could still be possibility-based. You can have extraordinary distinctions. You can make quantum leaps. You can be unlimited in nature and blow the ceiling off of what's possible for you, your coaching, your conversations, and your clients, while you still appreciate that the concept gives you a place to be centered in and grounded in that also delivers these elements to your clients without having to use them as crutches. I know that was a mouthful, but the simple way to put it is concepts help you go beyond language and logic without losing the value that language and logic gives you. So it gives you all the best of these worlds without being limited by those worlds, without being stuck inside those boxes. You carry those boxes along with you and you own them rather than them entrapping you. That's why concept is so critical. And these become more abstract. Sometimes they're more vague in ways. But that's why we want to be grounded in these areas first and even limited by them to some extent before we decide to set ourselves free by, taking a ride on a jetpack, so to speak. So these are more complex dimensions. They're extracted or abstracted from language. And most of the time, these concepts either are felt or they need to be like graphed or pictured in a model or a framework or a metaphor, so to speak. And those things still don't do the concept justice, but they can lead us to that concept more easily than the language or the logic can, help us stay grounded without, again, being like somehow limited in dogma. And these models and frameworks could be filled out, but usually they need to be worked with by more sophisticated methods through abstract discussion rather than just through drawing a graph or filling out a spreadsheet, right? There's more intuition in utilizing these concepts than logic and dimensions demand from us. So I'll give you an example of this. Like when we use assessments this week in the assessment discipline, assessments give us models and frameworks that aren't just simplistic fill in the blank. They are based upon multiple dimensions that we can appreciate and then graph to see the greater concept that we can pull from those dimensions with the technology. Does that help? All right, so that's one idea. That's one example of like a model or a framework. Besides that, inside of concepts, think of a concept like a space, a domain, a place to stand that you can be once again centered in and grounded in, but not limited by. It's a space to be in rather than a rule to follow, right? Dogma versus being freed up by a distinguishing concept, if you will. So these are abstractions from more basic models. A space could be an abstraction from an advanced model, for that matter, or a framework, such that they can be manipulated more easily. So think about it this way. Like if I draw you some like Venn diagram that shows different distinctions and shows how they combine together to form a whole, or like this, a pyramid structure that shows a hierarchy and how to, move up that hierarchy. There's also little models that you can use to appreciate, appreciate a higher level than just the language and logic of it. However, if I can get grounded in the concept here, I can take multiple models and bring them together into a domain or a concept and manipulate these models in language and discussion and with mastery without having to just be stuck in one model. Or because now that I abstract from those models, I can say, well, there's this distinction of effortlessness and there's this distinction of, there's this model of, let's say, higher consciousness, which I understand and appreciate. It's not just a language pattern. And then together, I can imagine how I'd apply those together in combination without having to go through each model and the dogma of the model alone. It gives me more ability to quickly manipulate these diagrams, models, and frameworks in language. So it kind of brings us full circle. Like a concept is expressed in language, but it's not limited by language because it also extracts models and abstracts those models into a discussion that can really bring things across to somebody. If they're at that level with you, if you can bring them to that point where they can really fly, they can go to the next level with you. So abstractions from models and frameworks such that they can be more easily manipulated, like as if they were manipulated in language, but you can still be grounded in the concept and talk from that concept as well. So think about like multiple frameworks working together. So those are the 3 crutches of coaching: language and syntax, logic and dimensions, and then finally more abstract concepts, models, and frameworks. And so use these different crutches: process, definitions, scripts, words, distinctions, logic, dimensions, frameworks, models, visualizations, metaphors, concepts, and see how you can combine these elements as well creatively in your preparation for sessions as you're going through certification. You do that, I know you're going to start to master some of these, at least the basics, by using the crutch and be a master of the crutch, and then eventually you will get to the point where you no longer need the crutch. And when you do that, you're going to be moving up this ladder, so to speak, and you will still have mastery enough to do the mechanics of turning the wrench when you need it, but also appreciating the entire architecture of the grand building that you're serving as well. So that said, I hope this makes sense. Any questions, let me know. I'm going to post a link to that other coaching tips video so you can get another way of looking at this, another model of hierarchy of different places to stand as a coach. And my request from you is to help us reach you when we're doing these by if you're on YouTube, subscribe and hit the bell. But no matter where you are, if you like the video, it's more likely that the AI out there will logically think that you want more of that, right? That's a great way to get more. Besides that, if you share it with people that you know this makes a difference for and it would help, or if you just do what I just said, more people who are like you, who actually could get value from this, it'll reach them. And so my request is that you join me as my partner in reaching others with this message, so we can really empower the world beyond basic dogma and language and move them up this ladder, so we can be better versed in concepts and models and frameworks that can truly, ultimately, in the hierarchy of this, change the world in the aggregate, right? Once more people actually access it. That's really my mission. And if you're willing to partner with me on that, I'd be totally grateful for that. But neither here nor there. Questions in the comments, and I'll talk to you in day 2 of week 3 in certification. Take